Hi everyone, so as mentioned, this is the follow-up to my video on negative things in the UK. This is positive things in the UK. If you're new to the channel, welcome. This tends to be the sort of thing I cover, although I also do videos more specifically on current affairs. But I also have these kind of what I would call musing videos, where I'm musing my thoughts on various subjects. I'm British, I'm from the United Kingdom, and this is some of the things that I feel are good in the UK, things that are make this country a good place to live in. Um, and like I say, the two videos are linked, so I might do the little box thing at the side if I find a way to do that um, for you to check out the other video. So I'm going to start by talking about culture. Big British culture is great. Now, what I mean by that, that might sound a bit general, but what I mean is I think we have a very rich wealth of stuff out there in terms of, certainly in terms of television. Um, things that have endured long beyond the release date, uh, as proven by the fact of being popular, very popular in North America and the rest of Europe. If you look at 1960s, 1970s British sitcoms, they've had an enduring appeal. But not just that, or well beyond that. Some of the most successful cultural franchises out there have their origins in the UK. James Bond, Harry Potter, Mary Poppins, the Narnia series. You could even argue Lord of the Rings because J.R.R. Tolkien was in Birmingham for a while. So, in fact, the Two Towers, I believe, was based on a structure that's part of the University of Birmingham. So the cultural influence in this country is vast, actually. Look at Shakespeare, the most printed works in history outside of the Bible. I mean, the literature, the literary input, output, I should say, of the United Kingdom is vast. Not just Shakespeare, we have Dickens, we have where do you start? I mean, Jane Austen, Catherine Cookson, Ian McEwan, to give a more contemporary example. Um, that's just a small fraction of what we've produced. Um, so the cultural output of the United Kingdom is significant, I would say. If we look at Hollywood, even in classic Hollywood, some of the biggest names were British born, or at least had a connection to the UK. Names like Cary Grant, Vivian Leigh, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Audrey Hepburn. She was born in Belgium, but she, I believe, became a naturalised British citizen in the war years. Um, so there is a vast influence there. Um, Even more recent years, people like Benedict Cumberbatch, Emily Blunt, Maggie Smith, Judi Dench. The list really does go on and on. Ewan McGregor, um, James McAvoy, Daniel Craig. It's the influence this country has had is significant. Um, so that's one thing that immediately comes to mind. I really like it. Most of the things I mentioned, I have box sets or I'm pretty into them. Not to say I'm a super fan, but I definitely would cite that as one of the positive things about this country, our massive cultural impact on the world. A big part of that is, of course, with the British Empire. English became the international language because of the spread of empire. Now, you'll notice that I haven't put the empire in positive or negative, simply because I honestly believe it's both. There is a negative side there, but this is not a video about the empire. I just say that it goes into both categories. There's a positive and negative. So I'll just put that there in passing. Okay, the history of the UK and the fact that we've preserved a lot of it. Successive wars have meant that older buildings have been demolished. In the war years, like World War II, aerial bombardment, and also during the dissolution of the monasteries in the early 16th century, there was a lot of buildings destroyed. However, a lot of old buildings in Britain have been maintained, and I think we do quite a good job of preserving them. In Britain, there's such a concept as listed buildings. This is buildings of some historic significance. Um, Groups like the National Trust, English Heritage, generally do a pretty good job of maintaining these ancient sites. They could be castles, they could be important homes. I've been to quite a few of them. We have quite a few World Heritage sites, including in this area. Off the top of my head, we have Durham Cathedral, which is one of the best examples of Norman architecture in the world. It's a magnificent cathedral. There's Hadrian's Wall, which is a little hard to access. You know, you need to drive there, but it's still quite impressive, and it was the boundaries of the Roman world. And there's many other examples. Cities like Chester, York, Edinburgh are absolutely drenched in history. Even other cities, which on the surface may seem a bit modern and industrial, also have their hidden secrets. In Birmingham, for example, there's the Science Museum, the think tank. There's Cadbury's World, which is to do with the city's chocolatier industry. There is the Jewellery Quarter in Birmingham. Um, so we really do have a rich heritage. We were the first fully industrialized country in the world. We were the first country we were the country that invented railways. We were the first country to have public railways. So there's a very rich tradition there. Um, and the great thing about this is many museums in the UK are free. They just rely on public donations. You can go into most civic museums and not pay. There's a few that you need to pay for, but that free entry, I think, is a very positive thing. And if I may briefly promote it, the museum here in Sunderland is one of the best. I've been all over the country, and we have a very good civic museum. It's got sections on the coal mining industry, on shipbuilding, on the pottery industry, um, and there's sections showing, for example, the way they do it. It's just four different women from different decades, sort of showing what life is like, how much things cost, and so on. So, and you'll get this in any city. You know, if you go to Glasgow, there's a People's Palace. Um, most cities have their own civic museum. And so, what I would say is, even industrial cities, which may not appear to be that interesting on the surface, they all have something that is worth checking out. If you have an appreciation of history, I think the UK is a great country. We're drenched in history, and we have preserved a lot of it. Stonehenge is a world iconic site as a prehistoric site. It dates from, well, actually, it was built in various stages. The oldest parts go back, I believe it's the Saracen stones, go back over 5,000 years. We have a number of Iron Age hill forts in the south of England. Um, so really, Britain is great for history. I mentioned Durham Cathedral, and it's not the only one. Some of our cathedrals are among the most impressive churches in the world as physical structures. Lincoln Cathedral was for a period the tallest building in the world. Um, Westminster Abbey, of course, is famous for being the burial place of many English and later British kings and queens. The internal diversity within the UK, I would say, is something that's worth mentioning because we're somewhat unique as a nation, as a sovereign state, in that we're divided into four home nations: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and each one has a distinctive identity and culture. Scotland and England were separate politically for a long time. Today, Scotland's got devolved power, but they became joined via the Crown in 1603 and later via parliaments in 1707. So there's a shared history there, but there's still distinct cultures. Although we don't have a single national day, which I sometimes think we should, we have the distinctive national days, or rather saints' days, for each of the home nations. So there's great internal diversity in the UK. With that, we're also a multicultural country. Um, I think it's more positive than negative. There is a flip side to that, of course, but we are actually, I would argue, one of the most tolerant countries in the world. We have our pockets of bigotry, we definitely have racism, but actually, most British people today genuinely don't care. If, for example, we have a politician who's black or Asian, it's no longer a thing, and that is a good thing. They're just another British politician, for example. Um, So I would say that multiculturalism is more positive than negative. With it comes a very rich array of culture. We have the Notting Hill Carnival for the West Caribbean community, the West Indian community, I should say. We have various, for example, Kumbh Mela events, South Asian community. We have Chinese New Year for British Chinese people, you know, and this may be true in other European countries and in Canada and the United States, but it is something you notice in the UK. And I think, like I say, for me, it's more positive than negative. Um, I was talking about culture, I can include music with that. Some of the biggest bands and music artists in history in terms of record sales have been British. The Beatles made no introduction. Some of the biggest rock bands in history, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, all British. Individual artists like Elton John, um, David Bowie, you know, and in more recent years, Adele, Ed Sheeran. So this country punches above its weight in terms of musical output. I think that's definitely a rich part of our culture and something we can be justifiably proud of. The Olympics, we have had huge Olympic success in this country. In fact, in the overall medal tables, Great Britain, Team GB, ranked third. Only the Soviet Union and the United States has got more medals in this country, or Germany, if you combine East and West Germany. But we really do well in the Olympics. This is a very, you know, I would say in sporting prowess, Britain has been pretty successful. I mentioned the Olympics. In recent years in boxing, we've had figures like Joe Calzaghe, widely considered one of the greatest boxers of all time. Two of the heavyweight champions have been British in Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. We've also increasingly had big events. Joshua versus Klitschko was held in the UK. But even if you're not into boxing, um, okay, football wise, we may not be quite as dominant as countries like Brazil and Germany and Spain and France, but still, I'd say England's pretty good. Um, if you look at cricket, if you look at golf, you know, there's a lot of sports have their origins in some form or another in the UK. Boxing does, at least in its modern context. Rugby is named after the town of Rugby. So there's a very rich sporting tradition in the UK. Um, what else can I mention? I think the British people, it's a generalization, but I think the British people have a generous spirit. The British people every year give millions and millions and millions to charitable causes. We have two big events, Comic Relief and Red Nose Day. And in both those events, um, you know, there's millions generated for good causes. I'm not saying this is unique to the British, but I think for the most part, the British are decent people. I think for the most part, people will pull together. We saw this during the pandemic, people coming together, helping out their neighbours, bringing food to neighbours who were self-isolating, and that's something that's, you know, I think there is a communal spirit in this country. Some say it's gone, it's a thing of the past. I'm not sure I agree with that. It's true that not everyone has that community spirit, not everyone knows their neighbours, but that's certainly not universal. Here in my street, we've every year we do a big cleanup, and we work together. And my neighbour brings out sausage rolls. We have hot drinks, so there is, I think, still a communal spirit in this country. Um, the welfare state. In my previous video, I mentioned how I think governments have weaponized it in recent years, but I do think the very fact that we have it, excuse me, is a good thing. The fact that we have the principle of universal healthcare is a very important thing. In the UK, healthcare is considered a human right. I think that's a very positive thing. Now, the NHS has many problems, our welfare state has problems, but the principle of both is a very good thing. That is to say, when people are sick, they don't have to worry about money as a barrier. It's a bit different with dentistry. But universal healthcare is the principle that is at the core of the NHS, and I think that's very important. Likewise, if you're unemployed, there is the resource there to get government support. Now, like I say, it's not perfect. I do think recent governments have been scapegoating claimants, and I don't like the way it's been approached. Nevertheless, there is a safety mechanism there. Um, it's not perfect. There's things I would change in terms of how it's approached, but at least it's there. You know, people aren't just left to deal with it themselves. Um, so I'd say that's a positive thing. Um, our natural beauty, we have some stunning landscapes in this country, from the dramatic mountains in Scotland to national parks like the Peak District, the Lake District. We do have some very beautiful countryside in the UK, and it varies a lot actually. Um, we get a share of natural disasters. We do get flooding, but really we don't have to contend with massive hurricanes, typhoons, earthquakes. So I suppose that would be another negative. Um, Wildlife. Again, at first glance, Britain may not seem as interesting as other countries, but in my street alone, I can think of at least 10 different bird species that frequent my garden. So Britain actually has a pretty rich array of bird life. We have foxes, we have badgers. So in terms of mammals, there's also quite a diverse range of animals. More than people may realize at first glance. Um, Food may not be the best in the world. You're never going to see Britain in the top 10 list. But if you want reasonably priced, filling food, you can't really beat a pub meal. If you visited the city for the day and you just want an affordable meal that's filling, you get your money's worth, you can't beat a pub meal. There's a chain in the UK called Wetherspoons, and I do like it. I like the concept of regenerating old buildings. It could be like an old bank or an old school or another type of old building, and then naming it after some aspect of local history. As an example, I recently ate at the Alexander Graham Bell in Edinburgh because inventor of the telephone was from Edinburgh. So the food, it's not the most exciting in the world, but it is filling, it's decent food, and it's reasonably priced. That's a positive thing. Um, Another thing that we sometimes overlook, okay, I mentioned crime and justice in the first video, but honestly, Britain is a relatively safe country. If you compare the situation in this country, some parts of Latin America, and numerous other parts of the world, actually Britain's pretty safe. We do have problems, so I'm not going to downplay those things, but actually it's considering we have a population of almost 70 million, our homicide rate's pretty low. I just mention that because sometimes the perception is there that we don't have it, but we do. I mean, the perception is there that it's dangerous, but actually it's not that dangerous, uh, looking at the bigger context. And that's not to trivialize anyone who's been through crime. I have, and it's a serious problem, but it's not quite as bad as sometimes the tabloids make it out to be. Um, Another thing I would cite is the British sense of liberty. Now, we can't be complacent in this country. I do feel that freedom of speech has been eroded in recent years, but I think the British people, for the most part, have a very strong sense of liberty and fairness, and it comes from our history. As an island nation, we've been quite fortunate. We've never had to deal with a full scale invasion for centuries. So, in that time, and having been the global hegemony in the 19th century, there's been perhaps a bit of complacency. But with that, I think comes a sense of I've lost my trail of thought now, but um, yeah. Anyway, that's hmm, apologies. I have lost my trail of thought. I was going to make a point there, but it's eluded me. What else can I say? Yeah, I mentioned conservation. We conserve old buildings. We conserve wildlife pretty well for the most part. Um, I'm sure there'll be more to add to this. Yeah, I could say political stability now. People complain about politics all the time. It comes to the territory, but we shouldn't take it for granted that Britain, we have peaceful transfers of power all the time. There'll be heated debates. Not everyone will be happy, but it's pretty much guaranteed in this country. If Labour replaces the Tories or Tories replace Labour, there's going to be some grumbling. There's going to be some protests. Generally, there is not violence. That's something that other parts of the world struggle with. So political stability, the peaceful transfer of power, is something that we've had for 3 centuries, actually. A few general elections, there's been a bit of violence, but nothing comparable to what's happened in other parts of the world. So that's something we shouldn't take for granted. Um, Finally, I would say the monarchy. I am a moderate royalist. I understand the criticism of it. I understand why people don't like it. The majority do, though. The majority continue to support it. I think it's a rich tradition. Um, I think it's deeply embedded in our culture. I think no one quite does pomp and ceremony like the British. I mean, if you look at not just a royal funeral, but a coronation or any big royal event, a royal wedding, there's nowhere in the world quite does it like the British. And I do think it's fair to say there's more interest in the British royal family than any other monarchy in the world. I mean, you just don't get the same numbers going to other countries to see their monarchy as you do with the British. So something that's intrinsically linked to Britishness. Um, and I think it's more positive than negative. I think the King's a decent man. I have time for King Charles III, and I'm a moderate royalist. Um, I appreciate the views of those who don't go along with it. I understand what they're talking about, and I'll always defend their right to criticise. But I think it's something that we can be proud of overall. Um, sure there's more I could add to this. There's probably more I could have added to the first video, but for now I'll leave it there. And you'll notice this one actually went longer than the first one, so maybe that's telling in itself. I ultimately do love my country. I don't love everything about it. I get frustrated at times, but honestly, I wouldn't change my nationality. Um, and by the way, on the subject of crime, one thing we don't have to deal with is mass gun violence. We may have a problem with knife crime, but we don't have the problem the United States has with gun violence. We just don't. So that's a positive. Um, like I say, there'll be other things I'm omitting, but um, in the culture section, some British movies are really good. Um, yeah, I'm gonna wrap this up now because I'm sure there's a lot more I can add, but for time reasons, I'll wrap it up. Um, Let me know your thoughts if you're British, or perhaps just as significantly, if you're a visitor to this country, if you have um, you're living in the UK, you're a student, you're a tourist, please let me know your thoughts. What do you like about Britain? Um, I'm sure there's a lot more I can add. I mentioned British generosity, the Homes for Ukraine scheme, show that when many British people gave out their own homes to help Ukrainian people after the invasion of that country. I'm proud of the fact this country is very strong in its support for Ukraine. I'm very proud of that. I think it's one thing successive governments have actually got right. Um, right, I'm going to wrap this up. Let me know your thoughts on positive things about the UK.